To do this throughout the year, and I'll just do very brief introductions to, I've asked our guests to talk about themselves and their work. And you may have read a little bit about Cynthia Panucci, who will be the first speaker, followed by Sarah Diamond. Cynthia Panucci has, for the past 10 years, been the director of the Art and Science Collaborations Incorporated in New York. And it's a real grassroots passion initiative that she slowly has grown into something that's becoming really international and wonderful. And a couple of months ago, I was in New York at a conference that she had at Cooper Union. And I just thought it would be really fantastic if she came and shared a little bit, picked a few people who do interesting work that cross over between art and science. And we're talking about not artists visualizing scientific work, but actually working together with scientists and having a kind of a dialogue. One of the real passions of mine is to try to make these bridges, and I'm hoping that Cynthia will inspire all of you to think about it more and to work on it more and to go to the other side of campus and bring people here and vice versa. So help me welcome Cynthia.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight, especially because in looking at the speaker series that Victoria's put together, you're really in store for a wonderful treat. She's bringing Europe and New York and the rest of the world to you this year, and I wish I could be here. But I am here right now, and I'm going to tell you about what I've been doing for the past 11 years. I'm an artist, and I started Art and Science Collaborations in 1988 when the art world really looked at me like I was from the moon when I said art and science. So a lot has happened since then, and staying power wins out in the end. Remember that, my friends. I founded... So over the past 11 years, Art and Science Collaborations has become a connector of people to information, a facilitator of public art projects, and an instigator, a producer of forums on issues of concerns to its members. Artists, curators, writers, scientists, and others interested in the curious intersection of art and science compose its ever-growing community of members. The ASCII Bulletin, a monthly email listing of news, information, and opportunities for this specific field, keeps its members well informed. Additionally, since 1993, we've produced a monthly speaker series, evening panels, and weekend symposiums, mostly at Cooper Union in New York City, and a few exhibitions along the way. My particular passion has been kinetic art and light art. And these exhibitions have been at the New York Hall of Science and other smaller art venues in New York City. And recently, a women's college outside of Philadelphia invited us to put together a show that I curated called Women Tech. And it's now traveling. It was in Philadelphia and now traveling to Virginia Museum of Art and Newport News, and then on to Prague, we hope. Tonight I'm going to show you 3-minute excerpts from several of these events that we've done over the years. And I'm going to start with the show called Pull of Kinetics 2 in 1993 at the New York Hall of Science. Okay.
Spring's soggy start makes it easy to forget that it's a time of renewal and discovery. But spring is the reason a new art exhibit's opened in Queens this weekend that combines the sense of discovery with the good sense and vision of science. Jonathan's Laura Walter has the story.
This was made network news in New York.
I don't think there could be a building more appropriate for this exhibit than the artistically intriguing New York Hall of Science in Queens. You might say the building and the exhibit are both located at the intersection of art and science. The exhibit is called Springworks because it's spring and perhaps because it has become an annual at the Hall. Works because the curator, Cynthia Panucci, has assembled works by 16 artists from an organization she founded, Art and Science Collaborations, where the art is in the works. In this case, a little April foolery in the works. Is it real or is it television? Who's in control, anyway? Artist Gil Rosen is in control.
This may be my favorite piece. The artist calls it Pisa, you know, like the tower, but this one does a lot more than reading.
Look closely now. Can you figure out how the hand hands down the book that becomes pages of the book that fold into a dove that crumples into a ball of paper and bounces in the bucket? If you show up at the show, they'll show you how. You know what they say, it's all in the eye of the beholder. At first, the eye beholds not a lot in Sidney Cash's piece, even though artist Cash insists he could see his sons, Ivan and Elliot. Look again. You can simply behold this bird by an artist called Flashlight, Honest Flashlight. Or if you're the kind of a bird who wants to get interactive, try this on.
Of course, Cynthia, it's obvious to me immediately what the artist has in mind here, but I'll let you explain.
Well, my interpretation of this work is that the spinning planet, the globe, sets the tone for the whole piece. The world is going too fast nowadays, and yet on the floor we have this huge lumbering barrel that just goes in one direction slowly and then another. And then these clippity-clap cafeteria trays, a lot of it has to do with pointlessness and repetition and, you know, but yet there's a whimsical animation that comes from motion, almost like little creatures, the two little ones on the floor.
And what did he call it?
It's called Untitled Pieces.
See, I would have called it spinning globe and cafeteria trays and metal stuff.
Springworks 2, opening tomorrow at the New York Hall of Science, will run through May 2nd.
And speaking of interactive, says this, Maury Alter, Channel 2, News. New, huh?
You like that spinning?
Okay, that was in 1993. Our next larger event was the Cyber Fair in '95. 5 years ago, I think ASCII probably did one of the first cyber art events for artists exclusively. At that time, we were just beginning to look at the internet as a new medium for art. Can you imagine that one of the workshops was on HTML? A lot has happened, but I would like to show you this clip by Laurie Anderson, who was one of our keynotes. Also, I'm not showing it, but Michael Govin, who was the director of the Dia Center, had just put his museum online, which was the first museum in the country to go online. So Laurie Anderson, of course, is the performance artist that has had a long, long love affair with technology and used it over her career of the last 20 years. Let's just show the clip.
Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the net. But first I have to say that I'm sort of overwhelmed by the amount of equipment in the building today, and as someone who's worked with technology for a long time, I've gotten to the point where about half my time, all I want to do is throw out all my equipment. Computers, processors, mixers, floppies, hard drives, really everything. And I mean, it's getting to be such a big job, just keeping up with the updates, and things keep crashing, and more than half my time I'm fixing things or learning new systems, and I'm thinking, wait a second, is this how technology is improving my life? And I find myself rereading the Unabomber's message to the world and thinking, he is right. It's true, technology is taking the human race on a reckless ride to nowhere, unquote. And speaking of rides, who thought of this metaphor? I mean, the data highway. Anyway, I think it was also Dick Cavett who said, highway, that's something long and gray and boring that kills a year. And to sum it up, I'm ready to join the Lead Pencil Club, which is a sort of a loose organization, and I just found out about it, and it's based on Long Island. And this club advocates abolishing all computers, hardware, software, as well as fax machines, and going back to lead pencils and magic markers. But the thing is, it's a little hard to get in touch with any of the club members, so if you actually want to join the club, it's pretty much next to impossible. But I think the thing that scares me most about the world is that it's becoming so incredibly high-tech and irreversibly corporate. And this is really no joke for artists, because what's happening at the same time is the demolition of places like the NEA and a general impression that art can be made by machines and by corporations. And it's like they decided they could do very arty ads, and then, you know, why not just do art too? And my fear is that young artists who like working with technology will get sucked into this, and that when they get out of school, they'll find it so hard to keep the tech tools together that in order to use the really cool equipment, they'll join one of the multimedia arms of these image-making corporations. And believe me, the intention of most of these operations is not to make art. It's to sell their products, which is an obvious point, but I really like obvious things a lot. So one of the things that I'm going to say today is, please don't get so attached to high tech that it means you can't do your work. Technology is obviously supposed to make your work easier, not more difficult and frustrating. And I know it's hard to resist with the pressure on to use some of these new programs, and the one that outstrips the last one and so on, but hey, just try. But you know, there seems to be a kind of national panic attack about speed these days, and I mean, things are really accelerating. There's a kind of hysteria about keeping up, and not to be a fear of being left behind. And there's this competitive thing about who has more memory and more bandwidth and more people on their websites and more information and the latest stuff. And the mentality is that even with simple hardware things like this, it's like, you see this mic? This is a piece of junk. And next week you'd get the same thing, twice as good, half price. And, you know, it's like everyone is in their own personal version of the arms race, you know, building up an arsenal of equipment, and for what? And so you just have to keep getting more and more and more equipment, and you will never, ever have enough. And it's really unbelievable. I mean, a few years, not many people needed computers. And suddenly everybody has to have all this stuff. And multimedia is, of course, everywhere now. It's not just artists. You know, every car company is doing a multimedia show. You know, car companies, fashion designers, shoe companies, they've all got these lasers and digital sound and monster graphics. And the point is to dazzle you with technology. And then there's supposed to be some relationship between the shoe and the show. But what that is, nobody really exactly knows. You know, the shoe was good, maybe the show was good, maybe the shoe is good. And it's really this old bait and switch trick. But the amazing thing is that it still really works so well, so efficiently. But you know, the thing about technology is that it's really big and really powerful, and not very many people understand it. So what do you do with something really big and really powerful that you don't understand? You worship it. So there's a lot of voodoo connected to it, a lot of morality that gets attached to it, like that it's really great and will make our lives so much better and so much easier, or that it isolates people and it turns them into weird antisocial loners, you know, typing away alone in their rooms, as if reading a book isn't also a deeply antisocial thing to do. But that said, I am a computer nerd myself, and I actually do like them in a very warped sort of way. And so today I want to talk about a few of the things that are being built in the digital world and how they might relate to some of the things that we're doing in this one.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective that probably is still worth bearing in mind. Next, I think it's Paul Friedlander. Yes. Paul Friedlander? Okay. Paul Friedlander is one of the three artists that was one of the winners for an international competition, an exhibition called Light Forms 98 that we did at the New York Hall of Science. And his work, well, it has to do with the solar system and outer space in terms of the gaseous forms of planetary systems and its relationship to this space of the New York Hall of Science. And you saw it on that original clip. And it was a space that was built to simulate a night sky. So let's see Paul's work. This work is about 20 feet tall. And go ahead. And he had built a smaller model, I think closest to it was 10 feet tall. In the triangular structure, there was a sensor, a light sensor. So when people went underneath the light sensor and moved their hands in front of it, then it would trigger a change in the sound and color and the speed of the rope. However, when 25 to 30 children start waving their hands at the same time, basically it cancels a lot out. We learned a lot in that piece. And the next clip I'd like to show you is from the first symposium that we did called ArtSci 98. And ArtSci has become an annual event. It's what Victoria had mentioned to you, where we're bringing together scientists and artists and trying to celebrate the commonalities and discuss and foster potential collaborations between all kinds of scientific fields. And the person that I wanted to show you was, again, one of our keynotes, Pauline Oliveros, who's a composer, a writer, a musician, recognized all over the world for her work. In fact, she collaborated for 10 years with a theoretical physicist, and together they developed a new meditative style, a new approach to music that they call deep listening. And this is an excerpt from the very end of her keynote address.
On the part of some curators has been complex. One, it's
sorry about that. That was the digital print. No. Yep.
In order to invoke the keynote and to end my talk, I would like to invite you now to try a sonic meditation called Sounds from Childhood. This will be the third performance of Sounds from Childhood, and its New York premiere in collaboration with you, the audience. You're invited. The first performance of Sounds from Childhood took place in Bern, in Switzerland, and the second performance took place in Silicon Valley at Interval Research Corporation in California. I consider my sonic meditations to be a kind of digital technology, even though it isn't represented by hardware, unless people are hardware, but somehow I think of them as software. So could you fade out the deep listening CD for me? and ask the audience to take a nice deep collective breath, if you will, and let it out with a good sound. Yeah, okay. And the instructions for sounds from childhood follow. And can you imagine a time in your childhood when you loved to make mouth noises? And can you bring these sounds to mind? Can you imagine freely making those sounds now? In the next 5 or more minutes, probably just 5 since it's time for me to be done, make as many of those sounds as you want in spaces you hear and claim as your own. And I'll be your listener.
Aren't you lucky I'm not going to ask you to make sounds? I'm going to be easy on you.
Can you explain that one for a second? What was that about?
Well, you know, she called everyone to kind of go inside of themselves and remember the childhood. If you were not told to be quiet and that children were to be seen and not heard, if you were told that every sound that came out of your voice was wonderful and good, and lots of children like to make all kinds of noises and sounds and express themselves that way. So she was trying to invoke those memories of childhood and give the audience an opportunity to make mouth sounds.
Now, did she collaborate with a scientist?
No, well, deep listening is more about meditative sound experiences and studying physical space. She did a piece inside of a cistern up in the state of Washington. So physical space and sound waves and the effect of meditative music on the brain, that was more what the scientists had to do with it.
Let me ask you something, Cynthia. The sound that we did hear sounded like jungle sound. Was that coming from the audience? That's already how far we were going back.
No, absolutely. That was all impromptu. That was the audience people just... Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't... I thought you knew that. Yeah. Yeah, no, those were audience people who, you know, a lot of the audience came specifically for Pauline, so they knew what she's up to. Yeah.
They were prepared.
They were prepared.
Okay, now.
The next was an evening panel that we did. It was sort of on the controversial topic called Collectability in the Digital Print. I'd like to have you hear the words of Henry Wilhelm, who's one of the world's foremost consultants on the longevity of color photographs. He's a consultant to MoMA in New York City and Bill Gates' photography collection. He spent the last 8 to 10 years switching his research to the digital print, the fine art digital print, and the digital printers. So in 1991 and 2, Graham Nash, which was Nash Editions, really used the iris printer for the first time to create the, as the only large format 34 by 46 inkjet printer in the world. So for them, from then on, now we are seeing digital prints being accepted. But at that time, I had heard from many artists in ASCII that they felt that there was a glass ceiling on the part of curators in New York not looking at this work because they felt that it was fugitive. So here are the comments from Henry Wilhelm.
Intrinsically cautious about any new technology. Another is, certainly if it's a photographic image, is this a photograph? And that's a frequently asked question. It was very significant about a year ago when Hewlett Packard introduced the desktop home-based PhotoSmart inkjet printer. And right on the boxes and in all their promotional literature, Hewlett Packard said, these are real photographs. And that, of course, raised the question, what is a real photograph? And that's not an easy one to answer, actually. And I've given a great deal of thought of this, that I think Hewlett Packard's right, that a real photograph is something that has an image that you think of as photographic. It probably implies that the printing device itself did not impart an artifact to the image that you can see without a magnifier. That is a dither in the highlights or whatever, and the PhotoSmart printer pretty well qualifies on that one too. Does it feel like a photograph? Well, we have an idea of what a traditional photograph feels like. We're familiar with the paper surfaces, but that's perhaps somewhat irrelevant. I think that this distinction is not a valid one. That it's the intent of the artist, the intent of the photographer, and if you want it to look and feel like a traditional photograph, there are papers and surfaces and inks that can do that. You may not want to, but you could. And again, one of the great appeals of inkjet printing is to be able to have a much greater choice of materials. There's been a lot of attention focused on the permanence of iris prints. In fact, it's often been remarked that no other new technology ever, and including traditional printmaking forms, have ever had this kind of scrutiny as far as how permanent are they. And there are a lot of business reasons for that. But one is, and I hold this up, this is done by Luminous Editions here in the city. This is a black and white photograph, and it's printed on watercolor paper. But when you look at this, even if you're told it's an inkjet print, and if you weren't told it was an inkjet print, you probably couldn't tell whether or not it was. It could be a platinum print, in fact. It wouldn't look much different than this. But if you are told it's an inkjet print, this is a new thing, and people don't have any experience with this. Everyone has photographs that go back quite a ways, your grandparents, relatives, and so on. And you have some, it may be very vague, but some concept of how permanent is this thing. When you look at this print, you have no idea how permanent it is. When I look at this print, if I didn't know what ink set was used, I have no idea whatsoever how fugitive this is on exposure to light. And of available ink sets used with iris printers, this could be as much as 100-to-1 ratio in terms of permanence to exposure to light, depending on the ink set. And that gets back to a very important point that you do need to know, if you're having prints made, you do need to know the ink set that is used, the paper that is being used. And this is another one, a warm tone image. And you will see some data on this sheet, but what all this has brought about is a lot more disclosure about how things are being made than used to be the case. And there is...
Sorry, that's it for him. I mean, of course, all of these people go on to speak much, much longer, but what's fugitive? It means that it's not long-lasting. And color prints that are printed by iris printers with the right ink set on Arch's paper are now valued to go 100 years, which is the same as a regular traditional color print on photographic paper. So, but it's interesting because Henry brought up the fact that there are many prints now that were printed on printers that no longer exist. They were out for a few years and then they were extinct. And he says, those prints they're antiques and therefore collectible. So what is collectible? It's quite an interesting topic. Cyber Art 99 is a symposium that Victoria came to and was a speaker, and as well as her good friend France Cordova, who's a theoretical physicist who started a program at the University of California in Santa Barbara called Research Across Disciplines. And Victoria was involved in that program, and it inspired me also to reinforce that I am on the right track, that there are maybe 5 schools in the country that are starting to open up, but and making bridges between the research facilities and scientists and artists. So we had another annual Digital Art and Science Symposium. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping. I'm reading wrong here. This symposium is called Cyber Art 99. So it was sort of a follow-up to the Cyber Fair in 95, but a long way from that event. Max Anderson, the director of the Whitney Museum, was one of our keynotes, and he told us about an association called Amica that the whole symposium was about the fact that now we have a new art form, net art, internet art, whatever you want to call it, but we have no really formal support mechanism for supporting these artists. So most of them, of course, are working 2 and 3 jobs and doing their art at home or teaching, whatever. So I wanted to do a symposium bringing together curators and artists and museum people and corporation people, Intel and others, to talk about whether we could expose some new forms of support models. And Amica had to do with royalties. And Max Anderson just came from Canada before he took his post at the Whitney, where every time a piece of art that comes out of their cold storage, the artist gets a royalty when it's hung on the wall. Well, that's very, very different than in this country. But he was proposing through this association that every time an internet piece was seen around the world, that the artist would get some sort of tithe. So that's a very interesting concept. But I wanted you to hear from 2 artists' perspectives rather than a museum perspective. So the first perspective, go ahead, is Helen Thorington.
So returning to the subject of the conference and how we build a support structure, I'd like to pose this as something to take with you through the rest of the afternoon. And the way John has already sort of taken the wind out of my sails here, but I'm going to pose this anyway, is our idea of support governed solely by economics? If so, then I think we better start thinking about what happens when we limit the parenting of artistic ideas by economic selection. We get a smaller and smaller number of inbred offspring. It is what Melinda Bratton, who is a web artist, calls cloning ourselves into a tunnel of ever narrower perspectives. And it results in what you may have heard, or I certainly have heard over and over again, the naming of 4 or 5 people as if they were the only artists in the world. My gut feeling, when I think of support, is that we really need to look very hard at alternative models, ones that begin with the artist, and that link us all together, artists, art organizations across the country, and that encourage the collaborative exploration and exploitation of a worldwide network.
I'm sorry that the sound recording at this event was not as good. I'm going to summarize. Helen is a composer and a musician. She is also the director of an organization called American New Radio and the founder of the Turbulence website that has recently received some really nice awards. She, like myself, as an artist, started trying to fund this new art form. So she's a model that is an independent person who just believes in something, and then she's been getting NEA grants and foundation grants. And she was sort of cautioning against the corporate model because they can dictate pretty much kind of what you will be saying sometimes. I mean, you have to watch what you say. Well, then the other person I wanted to present was Randall Packer. And Randall, interesting enough, was presenting the model of an artist organization called CJ5. And Randall is an artist and was a curator at San Jose Museum. And CJ5, these artists were actually, their manifesto was totally based on the corporate model. And investment bankers and R&D, and they now do have investors in their art, and you can really go and see their work on the web. CJ5 is one of the projects that was presented recently at a symposium at the Walker Art Center. So there were lots of interesting models. As a matter of fact, if you go to the website at The Thing, we did document a month-long discussion between many of these artists and curators and corporate people. And it's a very interesting read if you have the time. I think it's listed under Cyber Art 99, and it's archived at The Thing. So the Art Size Symposium this November, I'd like to present the work of Todd Siler. And Todd was the first person at MIT to get a PhD both in art and in psychology. His work is all about the brain. So let's look at his work.
And coming up and looking very closely at the clues that are left in this neural landscape. This artwork is an abstract cross-section through the human brain. It represents a giant cortical screen in which the images of the mind play out their drama. And it's a theater of sorts in which these images are forming from this neural-like tissue. This metaform is a hologram which shows a hostile thought process coming into contact with a calm, more benevolent thought process. There's an image of a sleeping Buddha, an ancient sleeping Buddha, that's in the corner, that's meeting these more aggressive elements. And the larger work that's depicting the influences of the type of fusion effects that form our physical universe and the type of fusion effect that might in fact occur in the human neuroanatomy, and the kinds of fusion elements that we use in creating hydrogen bombs to the deployment of these weapons. So it's from the universe to the mind, to the things the mind creates, to our use of those creations. Thought Assemblies is lighter in tone. It's filled with mixed emotions and feelings about our future and our evolution. There are passages of this work in which the human figure is reflecting on the subatomic particles that make it up and that make up the physical universe. The structure of the work resembles an EEG, or an electroencephalograph tracing, to suggest that the brain's electrical activity is reflected in our mental activity. Along this axis are points of intuition that are shared in both the arts and sciences. Along this vertical axis, information splits or divides and becomes more analytical as we move down this way, and more abstract and implicit as we move up in this direction. Ultimately, the information comes full circle, from the abstract to the concrete. In the past, artistic and scientific thinking have been at odds with one another. But what's interesting here is that rather than privileging intuition with the arts and analytic reasoning with the sciences, at points of intuition, there is a convergence of information that weds the artistic and scientific thought, and that in expressing or analyzing that thought, it immediately splits.
We have ASCII.com here, which is not our website. We get mail from them all the time. Okay, this is our website. And I want to invite you to go here because I have to say goodnight and close. I've already gone over my time. But you can look through the bios of people who came to the Art Size Symposium. Their emails are there. You can contact them. We just did a symposium on Future Time at the Taipei Museum and Gallery in New York. We do an annual digital print competition every year. Solarscapes is a project that's ongoing right now at the Liberty Science Center. Two pieces that, there's going to be the first solar theremin. I don't know if you know what a theremin is, but it's is going to be there. So that's going to be fun, and that will happen in the spring. I just wanted to mention that Women Tech is that show that I told you about that I curated, and we did a panel bringing together the pioneers of Bell Labs, and our thought is that they really were the origins of the multimedia artist. This is the DigiPrint panel, the digital print panel with Henry Wilhelm. You can, from there, you can go to his website and connect with the association and read about the statistics about ink sets and papers. If you want to know more about that, you know, you can click on his website. But so that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you. Do you have a couple of quick questions?
Yeah, there's time for some questions if anybody would like to.
Universities that do have this encouraging the science and art.
Yes.
And I was wondering what they were.
Well, Carnegie Mellon, Arizona State University, University of California, Santa Barbara, MIT, and it's at Carnegie Mellon, it's the Center for Inquiry. And in Connecticut, at Storrs, I believe, the University of Connecticut. In Chicago, it's the Chicago Arts Institute, I think, that is doing, I think they were the first ones to have a department labeled art and technology. So that's about it, but it's starting. It's certainly a lot better than 1988 when I started this whole thing. Any other questions?
Hi. Yeah, I'm very interested in this field, and I'm curious about what kinds of scientists, and in particular their kind of philosophical framing devices, work with what kind of artists. Because in my experience, not all scientists are open by any means to working with artists,
and not all
or vice
artists
versa.
Are.
So
not at all.
How do you find those matches, and what are some of them?
They're starting to find us by doing this symposium, by creating a focal point. And now next year, I hope we can get funding to really reach out to all the professional organizations. You know, every scientist's field, from physics to biotechnology to mathematics, they all have professional associations. So what we want to do is partner with them to bring them in, so that it will go out in their newsletters that we're doing the symposium, and then those scientists that are interested in collaborating with artists. I mean, because our website, if you type in art and science, it comes up. We get emails all, you know, not every day, but quite frequently I mean, scientists, there was an association for just scientists that use geo-positioning devices. I don't know what they're called. But they wanted to connect with artists that are using geo-positioning in their art. Scientists that are, it's very, very fascinating. But, you know, as there are few. It's not the norm. And unusually, those that are at the top of their field, those that are just starting out or even mid-career and trying to make a name for themselves, they don't have the time to do this sort of thing. No, I was living in Vermont then. No, sorry. Yes.
I guess I'd like you to step back a little bit and talk more fundamentally about why you think it's important that artists come.
I think it's important only because some want to, and so, you know, there's There's art for art's sake, so there are a lot of scientists, especially those interested in mathematics and that come out of that framework, that really love music and really love art, because when they see a painting, so they kind of think of it in mathematical terms or musical terms. It's almost a synesthesia experience for them. So there is a lot of crossing of senses on the part of the scientists, just like there is for the artists. And I find that I'm not interested in educating or trying to convert scientists or artists, but I find that there are many scientists who in their families, they had very heavy artistic traditions in their families. Those are the ones who very often are very interested in art and have pursued art and collected art and love it. And now many who are very much in the need of visualization tools to bring their science to life. That's not really what I call collaboration. I'm not really interested in the artist used as the artist used to use the scientist engineer just to make their art. The true collaboration is when they're both talking to one another and perhaps what is produced isn't anything like what they started out to do. So it's a back and forth dialogue, and who knows what can be done.
Do you have a way of kind of arguing that as socially useful knowledge that you frame those collaborations around?
Well,
Production of new forms of knowledge. I'm curious about how the organization kind of frames this, in part to do with funders, and whether you receive research funding or whether it's more application-based funding. Because I think these are international issues.
Yeah. Our funding mostly has come from corporations and from membership. I mean, we don't have, we may have some foundation money soon, but it's pretty much been a volunteer effort, and my credit cards are run up to the max. So it's not an established, sanctioned organization in any shape or form. Establishment, I should say, or academic. Any other questions?
The last video that we saw, are those the canvas and the artist, he painted it, or is for a product of an iris printer?
The last piece was all different. Todd Siler's was all different media. No, that was not a digital print. That was all done by hand.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
That was done in 1987 for his PhD project.
What's the name of the book,
Metaforming, and he wrote a book called Think Like a Genius. And as a matter of fact, he's so devoted to this connection that he lives in Boulder, Colorado, and for the past 10 years, he's been developing an art-sci curriculum for the school system, and now it's in place. So it's quite wonderful. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ran so far over.
I think what Cynthia does is brings people together, and this is what I saw in New York, how she really makes a point of pulling people together and noticing what an artist or a scientist is interested in and trying to connect them. So in a way, it's less about participating in that research or being established as an organization that creates that environment, but more as someone who's interested in making those connections. So she's a networker and artist, and so is Sarah Diamond, actually a networker extraordinaire and a performance artist, organizer, director of BAMF, Center of Media Arts, really amazing artist that is joining us for the whole quarter. So she will be teaching theory, and she'll be here. She'll be here, so you could track her down and talk to her and see what she's up to. And she's actually the person asking all these questions about art and science and the issues that are much deeper than a kind of a romantic art-scientist collaboration. We love to romanticize that, but there are so many issues regarding the economics, the way the culture perceives one or the other, and how the language is really still not there. So even if you want to work on a fundamental level with a computer scientist, you have to know the language to a certain degree to really be able to talk to him or her. And the same is true on the other side. So it's a real transition period that we're in, and it's kind of rocky.